As with most attacks, an APT will generally begin by defining their scope. You'll notice that I said most. This is because with a commodity threat actor, target definition isn't a priority. You can argue that this is just because they have no need to, but I'd say it's simply because they don't care. Collateral damage, attacking other organizations and causing damage as side effects, that's okay. It simply doesn't feature on the list of priorities. APTs, on the other hand, are likely to spend a sizable amount of time on the stage, if only not to get caught. It involves choosing targets and defining included organizations in their systems. This allows them to focus their attention on only specific targets instead of shooting at everything that moves. Next, it involves the choosing of possible attack vectors that will lead to initial compromise. This is generally chosen while keeping the final goal in mind. Here's an example. If the aim is to obtain sensitive data from a bank, an attacker might ask themselves a couple of questions. How much data is required and what is the motive? If the motive is to obtain customer passwords, an attack on the bank's systems is likely. But if it's just a single customer, then it might be worth looking at social engineering as a vector. Following this, APTs will often look for and recruit other attackers to help with various stages of the attack. This is also the stage where attackers will decide the larger goals of the attack. What happens after cracking the perimeter? Is the aim to cause mass destruction and make lots of noise, or is it to stay hidden and exfiltrate data from the organization? What is the budget of the sponsoring organization, if any? Factoring all of these conditions helps attackers behind advanced persistent threat execute their attack smoothly and silently. The first tangible stage of an attack by an APT is intrusion. This is where most of the actual work happens. Attackers will now use all the information that they've gathered about your organization from the reconnaissance stage, and they'll attempt to breach your defenses, generally using the most vulnerable points of entry. Identifying threats at this stage is probably the most useful, as very little to no damage to your organization can be caused prior to this stage. However, in the case of an APT, identifying attacks at this stage is not trivial. We'll examine detection mechanisms a little down the line. Attacks in this stage may come through a variety of different vectors, but the most common ones remain social engineering, phishing, and exploiting 0 days, often together. Another mechanism that's become very popular is a watering hole attack. In this attack, an attacker sets up a website that has malware loaded on it, and it'll attack anyone who visits the site. This attack generally requires a 0 day or an unpatched vulnerability in the browser of the victim, but was actually used to compromise Forbes back in 2015. Once an attacker breaches your perimeter, the next goal is to find the information that they broke in looking for. Since in most organizations, this information isn't available directly, attackers will have to go through other systems in order to extract the information that they need. But all of this needs time, and waiting will probably get them caught by the organization. This is where persistence comes in. By backdooring other systems on the network, the attackers can proceed to again work out how they will extract information from the organization while still remaining hidden. Additionally, if multiple systems are backdoored, it's unlikely that they will all be discovered, so it provides some insurance for the investment that's been put into intrusion. After creating some sort of mechanism to ensure persistence, the next stage is generally privilege escalation. In an organization's network, it's unlikely that all the users will have the same access rights and permissions. The most sensitive sections of the network will require another set of credentials to access. These restrictions can be bypassed by elevating your privileges to those of another user. Another advantage that comes with elevating your privileges is the ability to control other protection mechanisms. An attacker could clear out log files or change security policies, or even add firewall rules as 3 very simple but extremely damaging examples. Now that the attacker has a much deeper hole in the network, they can begin to look for the information that they've broken for. Phase 3 of an APT's life cycle is generally where they have the capability to cause the most damage to your organization. Data collected here includes internal networking information, security policies, and trust-based relationships, among other things. Attackers will use this information in order to plan out what the next stages of their operation will be, and how they can abuse the network in order to obtain the information that they originally broken looking for. For an attacker, attacking the internal network is almost always easier, since most defense mechanisms are created to keep attackers out, and they're unable to defend against attacks that originate inside the network. It's important to keep this in mind while you're configuring your network. Implicitly trusting all devices in your internal network to not be malicious is not always the best idea. Another thing that we need to look at is a concept called pivoting. Pivoting is a method through which an attacker routes their traffic through one or multiple systems in order to communicate across subnets. This can be extremely useful in how it enables an attacker to exfiltrate data from a system that you thought was secure in its own subnet. Data exfiltration is by far the most difficult part about running an attack on an organization. Many organizations, even those with poorly configured policies and intrusion detection systems, are likely to pick up anomalies in traffic. In an attempt to avoid detection, attackers will often employ several methods to keep the data that they exfiltrate hidden, since getting caught by an IDS or an administrator monitoring traffic is the last thing that they want. They generally achieve this in a couple of ways. The first is by using a VPN in order to shuttle their data out. This encapsulates the data in an encrypted container, which, depending on how the VPN is configured, makes it very difficult or even impossible for an administrator to know what is being transmitted. Another path that an attacker might leverage in order to exfiltrate data is through abusing trust relationships in a network. Are only upper management allowed to send emails with attachments? Great, just use one of their accounts to mail yourself files. Or even better, if the attacker is able to compromise the accounts of an administrator, for example, they could just change the settings in the IDS or the firewall in order to allow easier exfiltration. The same things apply if internal systems have unpatched vulnerabilities. The final stage of the attack is attack completion. After achieving the end goal, APTs will generally attempt to clean up all traces of their presence and sometimes will backdoor multiple systems to ensure continued access for any further operations. This stage is called attack completion. If the goal was to obtain sensitive information, this is the stage where the data will be delivered to the sponsor. As a defender, you want to ensure that you catch an APT much before this stage. Most of the damage to your organization will have already been done by now. The only thing that'll get worse is cleanup, since the attacker will have a lot of control over your network, and weeding out all compromised systems is never an easy task.